Steve was left dumbfounded when he heard what Jack said. He couldn't believe that Jack wasn't going to help them at all. As for what he was talking about, how they had treated him and his mother back during the heydays of the Alfonso family, he didn't think about that at all. You ingrate! I don't believe her that you really have the blood of the Alfonso family running through your veins. You really disgrace us, the Alfonso family. Steve shouted at Jack in anger. The next moment, he immediately rushed towards Jack with the intention of beating him up. He was fully angry at Jack, that he completely ignored to comprehend why Jack was present here, as well as the fact that Denali, the person whom all the top management knew as a real top dog, was actually following behind Jack. In his anger, he actually forgot about anything like that. In front of him, Jack was still the bastard that he was used to bullying back then. Even if he had little money now, that didn't change the fact that he was just a bastard. Since he could beat Jack back then he would do that just now as well. It seems that I have to teach you some manners, Steve stated as he approached Jack at a high speed. But just as he was about to reach Jack, he suddenly felt immense force hitting him on his stomach, and before he could react, he was blasted backwards. He rolled on the ground in an embarrassing manner as he screamed in agony due to the pain that he was experiencing. He looked up only to see that Denali was staring at him angrily. It was only after he was beaten to the ground that he regained his thought process. When Jack had appeared, Steve had completely ignored all those that were around and focused mainly on Jack. It was only now that he realized that Denali was actually present with Jack. This made his eyes shrink rapidly with fear. He knew Denali. She was the person who was in charge of running the businesses that were taken over when the Alfonso family went bankrupt. She was a big shot that he couldn't dare to offend. And now, this big shot was staring at him angrily. It was obvious that she had already been offended by him. Do you think you are worth it to try and teach my boss about manners? Denali asked coldly. Steve's mind immediately went blank. He couldn't actually comprehend what Denali was saying. Jack was her boss. What did that mean? Didn't that mean that Jack was the person who had bought over all the assets that previously belonged to the Alfonso family? Just thinking of this, Steve couldn't help but exclaim that all of this was impossible. How could it be that Jack, the most unfavored person in the family, had actually managed to acquire wealth and ability to acquire all the assets that were previously owned by the Alfonso family? This was something impossible in his mind. The Alfonso's family total assets were worth over $500 million. Even if the value of the assets that were previously owned by the Alfonso family had plummeted due to the effect of the fall in reputation, that didn't mean that the amount that was required to acquire them was small at all. Then, he thought of something as he looked at Denali's beautiful face. At that thought, he clutched his stomach that was still paining him, as he forced himself at the ground. Then, he chuckled as he glanced at Jack was just about to enter the building. Even when Steve was attacking him, Jack had actually never paused his steps. I never thought that you would actually go around to be a toy boy for a woman. So, that's where all your wealth is coming from? Humph. You are now being arrogant just because you're being used for your pretty face. Steve sneered as he said. Jack didn't stop at all. He just spoke as he continued entering the building. Why don't you go and use your pretty face as well to get into the position that I am in and let me see? Immediately after he said that, he disappeared into the doors of the building, not willing to continue entertaining Steve for a moment longer. Steve was flabbergasted again by Jack's comment. He never thought that Jack would actually react like that. He had expected that Jack would actually try to defend himself. But just as he was about to continue lashing at Jack even though he was already away, he suddenly had a harumph coming from the side. How daring of you to try tarnishing the reputation of my boss. Since you don't know your place, I will help you know it, Denali stated coldly. Immediately after that, she looked at the security guards and instructed them to throw Steve outside. As for the job that he had previously been holding as a driver, he had of course have been fired at that exact moment. The security guards that were present were obviously not from any other company other than GVSL. This was one of the arrangements that Jack had made. Each and every company that was under him had the security department being taken care of by GVSL. And amongst each of the security guard team that had been sent over, there were at least 2 mercenaries that Jack had hired previously. Of course, for the small companies like the ones that were previously owned by the Alfonso family, he hadn't sent any of those that had taken the body strengthening solution. But even so, the mercenaries that was sent over were not to be messed with. Jack wasn't going to let the small companies continue existing for a long period of time. He was planning on merging all the companies that dealt in the same line. But of course, he wasn't going to do that unless he received the first income reward from the system. That's right, he had already found a way that he was going to exploit the system. By buying several small companies, he could easily earn several first income rewards. And after that, these small companies would be merged into one so that they could dominate the market. Steve wasn't given time to comprehend what was going on before he was grabbed by the security guards and dragged out of the compound of the company. None of the security guards were lenient with him at all, and as a result, as he continued to struggle, he had received a punch or two that made him quieten. But when he was thrown out of the gates, he finally regained some of his confidence. He shouted at the security guards fiercely, "You guys don't know me well. Your boss is my younger brother. When my father comes over later, I will let you know what happens when you dare to offend me." The security guards looked at him with contempt clear in their eyes. They had been staying with Steve as he worked as a driver for over a month now. How could they believe the nonsense that he was spouting? And even if it was true that he was actually related to Jack, then there was nothing to worry about because Jack didn't seem to be in favor of this supposedly elder brother of his. Without even looking at him, they turned around and went back to their posts. As for Steve, he had no choice but to take out his phone and contact his father, Dalton. He was sure that when Dalton arrived, he was going to easily handle Jack. While all of this was going on, it had obviously attracted the attention of several employees of the company. Some of the employees were there when the Alfonso family was holding a high place in Crystal City. And as a result, they had also seen Steve when he was all high and mighty. And of course, his reputation was anything but good. He was someone who utilized his family's authority to bully the employees. And as a result, he had actually attracted the hatred of many people. He. Look at him now. The young master of the Alfonso family is now nothing but a dog. He is barking around, making so much noise that it is getting irritating. Stop disgracing the dogs by relating this person to them. He is obviously worse than a dog. Look at him. He doesn't know the meaning of shame at all. That's right. When he saw that he couldn't get anything from our big boss, he only resorted to trying to use an underhanded tricks by saying that he was a toy boy. Since he can't get anything from the boss, he only thought of tarnishing his reputation. I think what happened to his family was really deserving. You guys, wait a moment. About the new boss. Have any of you guys ever heard of him? That's right. Previously, it was Miss Denali who was taking care of everything here. But now, she suddenly has a boss. But why can't I make sense of what is happening here? If I heard correctly, Steve referred to him as a bastard. Do you think he could be that bastard child that was always mentioned in the Alfonso family? The one that was born of a mistress. But how is that possible? How did he become so rich all of a sudden? Could it be that he had actually become a toy boy? Hey, shut it up. It doesn't matter what he did. You should know that he is the current boss. If news reaches his ears that you are actually talking behind his back, you surely will be in a lot of trouble. Since he was there to take over the business, he didn't stay there for a long time. After he had signed a few documents that he was supposed to, he finally decided to leave. He still had other companies to pay a visit to. Although it was true that the companies could have sent the documents over to him so that he could have completed everything at once, he decided to go and pay them a visit still. The reason behind this was simply because he actually wanted to know the situation at the companies that he was owning. He didn't want a situation where he didn't even know what his company did. When Jack got out of the building, he was surprised to find out that there was a commotion at the entrance of the company. This made him raise his brows as he wondered what had happened. According to his thoughts, something like that should not have happened considering that there were security guards. All the same, he wasn't interested in something like that. He got into the car that they had come over with. Denali got into the driver's seat before she immediately drove towards the exit. When they arrived at the gate, the security guards immediately parted the crowd that was there so that they could allow Jack to leave. But it was just then that a shout rang through the air. "Dad, that's the car, Jack is inside there." Although he was inside the car, Jack could immediately tell that the voice belonged to his half-brother Steve. With his sharp senses, he could easily hear what Steve was saying from a distance. Although he wouldn't have wanted to stop, there were still a lot of people who were standing in front of the car and as a result, the car couldn't leave yet. Before he could say anything, he suddenly saw a middle-aged man pushing through the crowd. Steve followed behind him. Jack could of course immediately identify the man. It was none other than his excuse of a father, Dalton. He was looking now way older than when Jack saw him back at Incoed City. Jack didn't need to guess to know that Dalton had been undergoing a very difficult life. As a person who had always been living a life where he had everything that he needed, to suddenly be dropped to the lowest position, where he was being hunted for debts, it was indeed depressing. Nonetheless, Jack didn't care about that. When he and his mother were undergoing a lot of problems back in the Alfonso family, Dalton, as the family head as well as his father, actually did nothing to help him and his mother. Since he had ignored him back then Jack was going to do the same. Although he was the one who had made him fall into that position, Jack considered this as a payment that he had to pay for facilitating the death of his mother. Even though it was true that he didn't intentionally or unintentionally want to kill her, his ignorance of her had led to her being poisoned by one of his wives. "Jack, get out of that car right now. How dare you enjoy your life there while your father is suffering out here?" The moment that Dalton approached, he shouted. Jack, who was in the car, immediately rolled his eyes. He wondered if Dalton had a screw loose in his head. The guy was shouting with all the authority in his voice as if he could actually command him. Jack looked at Denali through the rearview mirror. "Just ignore them and continue with where we are going. We don't have that much time to waste on them," Jack stated. Denali nodded her head before she looked at the guards who were confused on whether to continue opening the path for the car or to allow Dalton to see Jack. Although it was true that they didn't like the way that Dalton was behaving, if it was true that Jack shared a relationship with Dalton, then they would be in trouble if they caused him problems. "Open the way," Denali stated calmly to the leader of the security guards. The guard immediately nodded before he instructed his subordinates to immediately open the way. Since this was another from above, the security guards became even aggressive as they dealt with those that continued standing in the path of the car. As for Dalton, he was pushed back by the security guards, completely preventing him from approaching the car. It was obvious that Dalton wasn't willing to let go of this chance to meet Jack. According to him, Jack had to at least fulfill his duty as a son. Since he was currently going through a lot of trouble, having a very difficult time to even have meals, Jack should immediately take care of that since he was currently rich. "You unfilial son. How dare you ignore your father when he is in this current condition? Or has that little wealth that you have gotten into your head?" Dalton shouted after Jack, with veins popping up on his forehead. Of course, since he wasn't affected, Jack completely ignored him. It didn't matter to him what nonsense Dalton spouted. At the end of the day, he was going to continue with what he was doing every day. Upon seeing that his words had no effect on Jack, Dalton changed his strategy. "Your mother will definitely be disappointed if she were alive. I'm sure that she would even cry when she saw what kind of a son you have become." Just as Dalton was about to continue speaking, he saw that the car had suddenly halted. He was ecstatic, thinking that his words had actually affected Jack. At that moment, he had already began fantasizing about how he was going to go back to his peak. "Humph! You traitorous people! Just you wait, since I'm about to go back to the peak that I was in before, I will surely make all of you suffer," Dalton thought to himself. Unknowingly, a smile had suddenly emerged on his face. He was already looking smug even before he received what he was yearning for. Just then, the windows of the car went down to reveal Jack's face. His face was currently stone cold. Anger could be seen within his eyes only if one looked closely. He stared at Dalton for a moment. Immediately after that, he spoke. "I hope that you don't dare to mention my mother ever again. Let this be the last warning that I'm going to give you. Otherwise, perhaps the current situation that you are in won't be the worst that you will have experienced." Dalton's eyes widened in disbelief when he heard Jack's words. He had never expected that Jack had actually stopped only to warn him. What was going on? He couldn't help but blink his eyes a few times. In the end, in both anger and embarrassment, he looked at Jack with reddened eyes. "How dare you scold me, you bastard? I am your father. And I am going to give you a piece of my mind so that you can know how to respect your elders in the future." Dalton roared in anger as he tried to approach Jack's car. But in the end, no matter how hard he struggled, he didn't manage to get through the security guards. These security guards were all strong and there was no way that Dalton could deal with them. In the end, Dalton could only shout at Jack from a distance. But his anger at Jack never diminished for a moment. Even Steve, who had been following behind Jack, was angry at the fact that Jack had no respect for his father. And as a result, he too had begun throwing expletives at Jack. Jack stared at them for a while. In the end, there was never affected him as long as they didn't mention his mother. "You should disappear. I hope I won't see you around my companies in the future." When Jack's words reached their ears, Dalton and Steve trembling in anger. Had it not been for the fact that they were being held back by the security guards, they would have immediately rushed at Jack and beat him up. But of course, that was only if they really had the ability to do that. After saying his piece, Jack immediately decided to continue with his journey. At this moment, the security guards had already cleared the path for the car. And as a result, the car then left the company's premises as it headed in another direction. They were heading towards another company that was in charge of production of toothpaste. Both Dalton and Steve were left stunned and angry at Jack, but in the end, they could do nothing at him at all. This was not the time where Jack was inferior and they could pick on him. The only thing that they could do at that moment was to stare at the car as it left with resentment clear in their eyes. They swore to themselves that, if they got an ability, they would surely take their revenge on Jack for embarrassing them. What they actually didn't know was the fact that Jack didn't like leaving loose ends behind, and in order to tie them up, he had actually sent a group of people to keep an eye on their moves. As long as they dared to do anything that would affect Jack or anyone who was closer to him, they would be immediately dealt with. Of course, this would be before they took action. Jack didn't stay in Crystal City for a longer period of time than he had already planned, and as a result, after he had managed to visit all the businesses that were previously owned by the Alfonso family, he decided to go back to the capital city. It was finally time for him to start his plan of setting up his own enterprise. Since he had already gotten a collection of companies that dealt in different lines, he decided that they had to share central management. In this way, perhaps he might be able to know which property of his did what. Additionally, he would as well start his plan of monopolizing several markets as early as possible. He was sure that with the power of several companies merged into one, the competition that he was going to receive would definitely be decreased. Although it was true that having several companies would attract several people who were going to compete with him from different sectors, his strength was also the determinant on who was capable of competing with him. Apart from that, Jack had already began the merging of the companies that he had acquired from the Alfonso family and the youths who were Collins's lackeys. When he had taken over the businesses that were previously owned by their families, Jack had decided to hand them over to Celine and her family. But in the end, Caitlin and Celine actually disagreed. The excuse that they gave was that having more companies would bring them more problems when it came to management. Of course, Jack knew that this was just a way that they were using so that they wouldn't receive too much from him. Although this was the compensation that Jack had planned to give to them due to what had happened to Celine, since they didn't want to take them, Jack wasn't going to throw them away either. He decided that he might as well improve their worth before handing it to them in the future in case they needed them. And of course, he wasn't going to let them continue being small companies. Just like the other companies that were currently under him, they were going to be merged with those that were dealing in the same goods or service. Currently, the number of businesses that were under Jack could be said to be many, and currently, some of them had already become widely spread in the nation. And one of them was the grocery department that was currently under Grace. The lady had been so diligent in her duties in that she didn't need supervision from Jack. Her speed of expansion had increased during the previous 2 weeks. Currently, the grocery department was well known in the country. It was amongst those that were feared. The expansion speed of the company was just fierce that it had sent shivers down the spines of those that were in the grocery business. They were getting frustrated at the fact that the groceries that were expanding rapidly were reducing their markets. As long as they appeared in a city, all the other groceries would definitely fail. This was simply because it was as if the owner of the groceries was deciding to do a business that would bring him losses rather than profit. As people who had been in the business world for a long time, they could immediately tell what the boss of the groceries was thinking. He was deciding to deal with them as early as now, so that he could monopolize the market in the future. Although it was true that he was suffering losses at the moment, the same couldn't be said about the future. Although they would have really wished to compete with him, they couldn't do it. Their pockets weren't heavy to keep up with the losses that they were going to incur as long as they dared to do as he was doing. The end of the month was approaching and Jack was definitely looking forward to the surprises that were going to come. At the same time, he was also looking forward to another event that was just about to happen. It was going to happen during the following month. It was going to be Celine's birthday soon, and as a result, Jack had already began making preparations to surprise her. Since that was a special day for her, Jack was willing to make it even more special for her. Currently, Jack was inside his villa in Serenity residential area. He was having a visitor again. Benjamin had come over to visit him once again. "What is it this time?" Jack questioned. During the last time that Benjamin was here to visit him, the old guy had been acting all mysterious. This had certainly made Jack dislike him. If you are not willing to say something, or you are not willing to give the details about something, then it was better to not mention it at all. Benjamin's lips twitched. He was now wondering if the young man in front of him was actually his grandson or a stranger that he was meeting. In the end, he could only shake his head as he released a sigh. This was the price that he had to pay for following the family rules to the latter. Ahem, I wanted to ask you about what I told you last time. Have you considered coming back to the family? Benjamin questioned. Jack looked at Benjamin silently. Since the day that his mother was killed by someone from the Jezda family, he had never wanted to go back there. Additionally, it was a sure bet that as long as he went there, he would be bound by the stupid family rules that were made. He wasn't ready for such stupid restrictions. Although it was true that the family rules were meant to protect the family members, for someone like Jack who liked to be free, that was just a prison. I already told you last time that there's no way that I'm coming to join that family. I'm good just the way I am, Jack stated calmly. Benjamin sighed once again. Although he had already been expecting such an answer, he was actually still disappointed. After taking a deep breath, his expression turned serious as he looked at Jack. Then, he questioned, "Are you the one involved with Nathan's disappearance?" Jack wasn't surprised by that question. He knew that something like the disappearance of Nathan wasn't going to be hidden from someone like Benjamin. The disappearance of Nathan was definitely something that involved several deaths of police officers. And as a result, this was a big matter, although it had been hidden by the higher authorities in the government. As for Benjamin suspecting that Jack was the one who was involved, Jack wasn't surprised about that as well. At the end of the day, Benjamin knew that Jack had a grudge with Nathan. And as a result, he was sure that Jack wasn't going to sit back as he watched as Nathan disappeared. He must have done something. Yes, I was the one. Jack wasn't afraid to admit that he was involved with the disappearance of Nathan. Even if the Jezda family wanted to come after him, there was nothing that they could do to him. His current power wasn't something that the Jezda family could handle. They had to be careful when they tried handling him. Jack was currently sure that they had already investigated about him, and he was sure that they had already found some of the information about him as well. Although it was true that his information had been hidden away, for someone like Benjamin who had always been keeping an eye on Jack ever since he was young, there was no way that some of the details could be hidden from him. "Where is he?" Benjamin questioned. Although it was true that Nathan had committed a lot, and was also involved in several things that were against the law, he was still his son at the end of the day. And as a result, Benjamin still wanted to see him. Even though he wasn't going to let him go scot-free, he thought that the punishment that had been placed on him by the court was enough. "He is dead," Jack stated bluntly. Benjamin opened his mouth for a moment, as if he was intending to say something, but he failed to do so. There was great surprise in his eyes as he stared at Jack blankly. Although he had expected that Jack was involved with the disappearance of Nathan, he had never expected that Jack would actually execute Nathan that easily and fast. It would be a lie to say that Benjamin wasn't angry at Jack. But, just like the time when he watched as Jack and Anne went through a lot in the Alfonso family, there was nothing that he could do at the moment. He himself knew about Jack's abilities. Not to mention him, even the whole family would definitely have to pay a lot if they wanted to have a fight with Jack. But of course, this was only because the old man didn't actually know the full capabilities of Jack. Had he known about that, he would have definitely known that the Jezda family didn't stand a chance against Jack. "I can understand that you are angry at him. But was it really necessary for him to be killed?" Benjamin asked after a long sigh. Since he was involved with the deaths of many people, even his death was definitely not enough to repay the countless number of people that he had killed in his life, Jack responded. Benjamin was currently undergoing great struggle within his heart. He really wanted to say something, but he was tied. At this moment, he had really come to start hating the family rules. If not for the family rules, perhaps Nathan would still be alive at this moment, Benjamin thought to himself. Jack remained silent and didn't say a word. He was waiting for Benjamin to continue or leave. "Where is his body?" Benjamin asked despondently. "His body disappeared," Jack replied. "His body disappeared," Jack replied. Benjamin remained silent for a moment as he didn't know how to react to Jack's words. He stared at Jack for a moment as he wondered if Jack was joking or he was serious about what he was saying. But when he saw that there was no hint of mischievousness on Jack's face, Benjamin's expression darkened. "Jack, I can understand that you have already killed your Uncle Nathan. But that doesn't mean that you deserve to destroy his body. I told you I want to see his body, and this is not the time for you to play such games." Benjamin was serious at this moment. He could accept that Jack had dealt with Nathan and had killed him off because Nathan had already done so many crimes that were unforgivable. But he couldn't accept that he actually couldn't bury his own son. Even though it was true that Nathan had committed a lot, he was still his son in flesh and blood. Since there was nothing that he would do previously to save Nathan, then the only thing that he could do was to give him a decent burial. I don't think I have time to joke around with you. I told you that his body disappeared because it really disappeared, Jack stated. At that time, he had seen that the thin man had poisoned himself. After that he had become ashes. An idea came into Jack's mind at that moment. And as a result, he looked into the things that the thin man was carrying, and as a result, he had managed to find that the thin man was carrying a poison like the one that he had taken. Well, Jack didn't actually know what type of poison that the thin man had taken as it was in his mouth. But of course, there was always the trial and error period. After several attempts of trying the poison on Nathan's dead body, Jack had finally found the poison that he wanted. But since Nathan was dead, his circulatory system wasn't working, and as a result, Jack was forced to dilute the poison before pouring it on Nathan's body. And just like what had happened to the thin man, Nathan's body also turned into ashes. And just like that, Jack had managed to clear the scene. When Benjamin saw that Jack wasn't relenting, he began getting angry. Although the person in front of him was his grandson, the relationship that they shared wasn't that deep as the one that he shared with his son. And as a result, as long as Jack didn't hand over Nathan's body, Benjamin was willing to go all out to make sure that Jack did that. He didn't believe that there was a way that Nathan's body could disappear. Jack must be hiding it somewhere. Benjamin's face had already turned red due to the anger that he was trying to hold in. He looked at Jack for a moment, before questioning once again. Jack, are you going to hand over Nathan's body or not? You know, I allowed you to do as you pleased without interfering with anything. But now, you have to hand over Nathan's body, otherwise. Benjamin didn't finish his words, but Jack could immediately understand the underlying meaning. He looked at the old man in front of him before snorting, "It doesn't matter what you say. I already told you that Nathan's body disappeared and there's no way that I can find it even if I want to. Furthermore, I hope that you don't try threatening me. This is simply because I don't like threats." As Jack stated these words, he looked directly into Benjamin's eyes. It was obvious that he didn't care whether Benjamin was his grandfather or not, since the two of them never shared any kind of relationship other than the blood relationship that they shared. Jack wouldn't hesitate to take action if the old man pissed him off. Benjamin stared at Jack's eyes for a whole minute. When he saw that Jack wasn't retreating his gaze even after all this while, he shook his head as he decided to relent. "I hope that you are right about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're going to be in deep trouble. This world has hidden a lot that you don't know and understand." After saying his piece, Benjamin got to his feet before he left the villa. He needed to get some time before he could finally calm down. It was true that he was angry, but there was no way that he was going to vent the anger. Jack didn't escort him out of the villa at all. Since Benjamin was an uninvited guest, there was no need for him to be so polite considering that the two of them were not parting in good terms at that moment. After seeing that Benjamin had left, Jack went back to his room. He had decided to finally analyze the businesses that he was currently having. He had already made Denali to prepare the data and send it to his email. After getting into his room, he took out his laptop and began looking at the information. Since he was planning to integrate several companies, Denali had simplified the information that she had sent over. The very first company that was leading was definitely the grocery department. Although it was true that the grocery department didn't have a name currently and was referred to as a grocery department, its reputation wasn't to be messed with. This was after all something that Jack had started with. It really held an important position to him. Currently, the grocery department had already spread to over 20 cities in the country, and the expansion was still ongoing. Due to the influx of capital that Grace was receiving, she had managed to easily stabilize the new groceries that were being opened in the new cities. And since she was buying out the groceries that were present in that particular city, she didn't have to deal with a lot of issues like advertisement and so on. Since the groceries themselves already had customers, all they had to do was to do a promotion by lowering the prices and giving several offers. In this way, they were able to easily deal with the competition that was present in those particular cities. But all the same, the influence of the grocery department was only in smaller cities that were present in the other 4 regions. As for the central region, Grace had not yet made a move. The people who were found in the central region were definitely not easy to deal with. It all came to not only having a good amount of money, but even the connections mattered. This was the reason as to why Jack had instructed Grace to deal with the other regions first before finally dealing with the central region. The following company was GVSL. This was his security company, the Good Vision Security Limited. Just like the grocery department, this company had been improving ever since Jack came to the capital city and completed the merging of 3 security companies. Currently, it could be said that this security company was definitely ranked among the best in the country. It was not only in terms of net worth, but even the services that were being offered. Having managed to recruit several mercenaries, the impact that they had caused in the security sector had definitely caused the reputation of the company to shoot up. With that, Tracy had been so busy dealing with the new contracts that the company was receiving day in and day out. But with the help of Ayush, the two of them had managed to handle the security company well. Since the two of them had already taken the body strengthening solution, they were able to work overtime without too much worries. With the acquisition of the guns from the military, the private team that Jack had instructed to be formed was already in place. As for the 3 helicopters that Jack had received from the system during the first month of his income, they had already been taken over by the team. Livingstone was currently considered the real leader of the whole security team. With his experience as a soldier, as well as the comrades that he had brought over, the mercenaries were currently well disciplined. With the benefit of getting stronger, these mercenaries dared not to mess around when they were on duty. Since Jack had promised them that there might be future benefits, they had been so diligent when working. What followed was the Rose and Calmont entertainment companies. These 2 companies were currently performing well enough. But still, Jack thought that this was not good enough for a person of his level. Since he had already pointed at the entertainment companies as amongst those that were supposed to be monopolies, then they had to perform better than they currently were. And, Jack was considering the merging of the 2 companies. Each of the company on its own was already a big one in the country. As long as he managed to merge them into one, he was sure that he would perhaps dominate the entertainment sector. Currently, for the Rose Entertainment Company, he was the major shareholder while Celine was the other shareholder. Only the 2 of them were the real decision makers of the company. As for Calmont Entertainment Company, Jack currently owned 90% of the shares. As for the 10% shares, they were currently in the hands of Jonathan. These was the shares that Jack had given to Jonathan. Jack had only done this simply because he was in a good mood. At that time, it was Jonathan who had handed him 10% shares of the entertainment company. And with the help of the system, he had managed to acquire the remaining 90% shares. With that aside, let's look into the hotel. Jack stated as he continued scrolling down the screen towards the information about the hotel. With that aside, let's look into the hotel. Jack stated as he continued scrolling down the screen towards the information about the hotel. The Glaze Hotel. This hotel, when he had taken over, it was amongst the top hotels present in the country. Additionally, it had already spread its roots in several parts of the country. He had managed to receive the hotel from the system due to the fact that it was his first month reward, and as a result, Jack owned all the shares of the hotel. And ever since he had taken over the business, he had managed to push it further. Additionally, with the increase in reputation that had occurred after the attack and the compensation that Jack had given to the victims, the hotel was now flourishing. Just like the grocery department, the Glaze Hotel had also been expanding. This time, it was under the supervision of Denali. With her expertise business management skills, she was able to make decisions that impacted positively to the hotel. When he was seeing her handling several issues of the company easily, Jack had at one point been tempted to get the professional business management skill from the system. But since his life wasn't going to depend on managing the business, Jack managed to prevent himself from falling into the temptation. Otherwise, he would have wasted a good opportunity to get a good skill in the future. Apart from the Glaze Hotel, there was also the Eden residential building. Since that building was a fixed asset, Jack hadn't made any changes to it. He wasn't willing to enter the real estate markets this soon. For the Serenity residential area, he had managed to have 3 more villas being sold. This was due to the advertisement that Jack had organized with the 2 entertainment companies. Since currently, Jack wasn't using those villas, he thought that he might as well sell them out as soon as possible and acquire the money. Since he was going to splash the money soon, the more the money that he had, the better his plans were going to go. He had managed to sell one villa that was worth $96 million, another that was worth $118 million and another that was worth $130 million. This had brought him a total of $344 million. Thanks to the system Multiplier, he had managed to acquire $34.4 billion. This had in turn drastically boosted his account balance. His current balance was $391,774,170,138. He was currently approaching the trillionaire section. And this is just in terms of his current liquid cash. If the other fixed assets were added to the equation, his value will definitely skyrocket higher. Then there was the Hope Hospital. This hospital had already been improved by Jack. Currently, it was already considered amongst the very best hospitals in the country. The reason for that was simply because Jack had not only managed to acquire a good place for the hospital, but even the facilities and the equipment that could be found in that hospital were top-notch. Due to the availability of this equipment and facilities, many doctors had opted to join the hospital. And as a result, the hospital had also done what the Brightway Medical Research Center had done, poaching experts from others. As for Andes Corporation, the one that he had received 21% shares of from the system after the shares that he had received from Ben had been multiplied by the system, Jack didn't really care about it. Additionally, ever since he had taken over those shares, he had actually never received anything from it. This was simply because the dividends were being given out on an annual basis. The Brightway Medical Research Center was doing well as well. Other than the anti-leukemia pills that Jack had given out, the recipe of the experts that were currently in the facility had managed to make several breakthroughs. Although none of the breakthroughs could deal any huge impact to the current medicine world, it was a good improvement as it showed that in the future, the institute would definitely give better results. Due to this, the reputation of the institute had increased. This was just another way that Jack was planning to market some of his businesses in the future. As for the Prosperous Pharmaceuticals, since it had been involved with the selling of the anti-leukemia pills, it had been getting more and more customers as days moved on. Due to the low price that the medicines were being offered in their pharmacy, there are many people that were visiting it. And as a result, there are several pharmacies that were losing their customers. But even so, Jack wasn't bothered about them. This was the business, and competition was a must. And since he wasn't doing anything in particular that would affect them directly, he was still doing things according to the business ethics. Finally, all the other companies that he had managed to acquire from the Alfonso family as well as those that were Collins's lackeys, I think you should take a look at. None of these companies were really big enough to cause a stir in the business market. For that exact reason, Jack had decided to merge several of them to remain with only 3 companies. One of the most called World Foods. This was the company that was going to be formed after several companies that were involved in anything that was related to consumables. His plan was to deal with anything that was related to food. Of course, this didn't involve the groceries. It simply dealt with things like noodles, rice, fish, and so on. Then, there was another one that was called the Future Techs. This was going to deal with anything that was related to technology. And finally, there was another company that dealt with miscellaneous things. Although they are being called miscellaneous things, these were always important when it came to safety and so on. This was something that was related to rubber and plastics. It was called Green World. Its purpose was definitely to ensure that all the plastic materials were recycled, ensuring that the environment stayed clean. Other than recycling, it also dealt with production of several rubber and plastic products. It didn't matter what line it was, Jack had decided that he was going to deal with everything that he could. Finally, with all these out of the way, Jack had to begin with what he was planning, since he was planning on being a monopoly. Focusing on a single one at a moment while leaving the others to Denali would be the best option. His current best option was definitely the entertainment sector. This was something that he had decided on. Since he already had a big advantage by owning 2 entertainment companies, he might as well give them a head start so that they could be easily handled even if he focused on another thing in the future. But for the entertainment company, it wasn't just a matter of having many stars, or having so much money to sponsor several activities. The entertainment companies all cared about creativity. Without creativity, there was no way that the entertainment company was going to rise to the top. And for that particular reason, Jack had decided to involve himself in the entertainment company. But he wasn't going to involve himself directly as an actor or a singer. The plan that he was having in his mind at the moment was to start providing the company with the materials that could be utilized to boost the reputation of the companies. The first one would definitely be the merging of the 2 companies. Once the 2 companies were merged, not only would the company that will be formed would contain the most popular actors and singers in the country, but even the directors and other staff members will definitely be amongst the best. And apart from that, there was also a matter of content. Since he thought that the movies and series that were being produced at the moment were just subpar, he thought that he might as well write the script for them. That was the reason as to why he was going to use one of his slots. If possible, he really wouldn't have wanted to utilize the slots. At the end of the day, the longer the period that the slots remained, the better the skills that he was going to achieve in the future as long as he wanted. But now, with the main aim of completing the system condition for the upgrade of his authority to the second level, he had no choice but to do so. System, I would like to get the professional script writing, Jack said in his mind. Please confirm, the system's voice sounded in his head. Just do it already. I've already thought of it, Jack responded. Confirmed. The host has decided to use one of the free skill slots to acquire the professional script writing. Since the skill is coming from the free skill slot, the host doesn't need to complete any mission to own the skill. The host should prepare himself for the information that is about to come in. Immediately after this system prompt, Jack felt somehow dizzy as if someone had hit his head hard. In the next moment, a very huge bulk of information was poured into his mind. At this point, it wasn't just a matter of his creativity, but his thinking capacity had also been increased. Even his observation skills had been improved as well. Just like that, Jack felt that he could actually write a very good story that many people would fall in love with. After he had gotten the professional script writing skills, Jack didn't delay any longer and decided to contact the person who was in charge of the Rose Entertainment Company. Not long after, the call connected and a man's deep voice came through the speaker of the phone. Hello, boss. Yes, Alex, how was your day? Jack questioned. Alex was the current CEO who had been appointed by Jack after Denali had approved of him. He was the one who was currently taking charge of the Rose Entertainment Company. His abilities could not be doubted because Jack had seen it himself. Alex was definitely a man who was decisive enough to make decisions concerning the company. His capabilities could not be doubted since Denali had actually acquired him from somewhere, and since she had taken him away, the place where Alex was working before was definitely crying. This was due to the fact that, ever since Alex took over as the CEO of the Rose Entertainment Company, there had been so much progress in the company. It wasn't just a matter of music, but even the movies and TV series that were being produced were definitely being at a good level. Unlike some of the CEOs who could easily allow any kind of script in the entertainment company for their own benefits, Alex was different. As long as the script was not on par, he would definitely not allow it in the company. This was something that Jack loved about this guy. It definitely wasn't easy to get a person who was capable as him. My day has been good, boss. What about you? Alex replied in a cheerful voice. Although he was somehow tired due to the heavy duties that he was taking care of, he was still happy about the position that he was occupying. Moreover, his boss was definitely a person that many people would have dreamed of getting as a boss for them. As long as his actions were for the good of the company, the boss was willing to support him fully. This had made him be in a good mood ever since he had taken over the position of the CEO for a month now. That's good to hear. Tomorrow, I will be coming over because I need something to change. Currently, the main problem that the company is experiencing will definitely be the lack of quality scripts. You have to be prepared to start acting on the scripts that I'm going to present to you soon, Jack stated. Alex was stunned for a moment as he had never expected that his boss was going to take care of the problem that had been disturbing him for a very long time now. It was just that, he had been afraid that his boss would say that he was incompetent if he was not capable of getting good scripts. Who knew that something like this would happen? The boss had decided to come forward on his own to solve the problem that had been eating his mind all along. But still, he was quite skeptical about the quality of the scripts that Jack was going to bring over. At the end of the day, he wasn't sure about Jack's character just yet. The two of them had not met for a very long time yet, and since he was always busy and Jack rarely visited the company, the interaction between them was limited. What he currently hoped was definitely for Jack not to be just like some of the bosses who would use this opportunity to bring over scripts that were basically trash just to please someone. Okay then. I will be making preparations as early as now. All the same, Alex replied. There wasn't any way that he was going to go against his current boss. Previously, before he was taken by Denali to come and work for Jack, he had been in a small entertainment company. The reason as to why that company was small was not due to the lack of capital or stars. The main reason for that was simply because the boss of that company was a moron. He had actually taken over the company from his father after he passed away. But the guy was a person who liked vanity, and as a result, he would actually bring any kind of script as long as he got the benefit that he wanted from the other party. It didn't matter if the movie or TV series performed well, as long as he got what he wanted, he was satisfied. Since Alex was currently the CEO of that company, he had been depressed. No matter how much he tried to advise that guy, he would be ignored. At the end of the day, Alex was just a CEO who could be replaced at any time. But due to the behavior of that boss, the company had begun losing several of its stars. And the main reason for this was due to the fact that the boss was misbehaving. None of the female stars in the company were safe from him as long as they were working in that company. I think you should take a look at. As usual, a person like him was shrewd. During the time that he was signing the stars, he had made sure to include several clauses that would bind that particular star to the company for a very long period of time in the contract. And the breach of the contract was going to result into that particular star paying a remuneration that was just impossible to imagine. It could be outright said that it was unreasonable. But since the stars were happy to get the job, they had no choice but to swallow their dissatisfaction and get the contract. But when the boss began misbehaving, they were in deep trouble. He had been getting desperate about the job. If possible, he would have quit long ago and looked for another opportunity. But, since he was in urgent need of money, he had no choice but to stay there. Additionally, just like the stars, he too had signed a contract that if breached, he would have to pay a compensation of $500 million. This was an amount that he couldn't afford as he himself was already in need of money. Just as his hopes were about to be crushed, Denali suddenly appeared and offered him an opportunity to work for Jack's company. Additionally, she had even offered to pay for the breach of contract penalty, and since he had been granted such an opportunity, of course, Alex accepted. And when he got to know that he was actually going to be the CEO of the Rose Entertainment Company, he was completely ecstatic. During the time that he was signing the contract, he found out that the contract that he was being offered was definitely the best that he had ever dreamed of. That was the exact reason as to why he had been working diligently during the past month that he was in that position. And due to his efforts, the performance of the company had definitely shot up. It wasn't just a matter of releasing new movies and so on. It was also a matter of entertainment, as well as the treatment of the stars. This had definitely created a good working environment for the people in the company. And as a result, the performance of every department of the company had definitely increased. This was something that had made him happy. Added with the support that he received from Jack in terms of finance, Alex couldn't be more happy. But, the only thing that he wished for was definitely for Jack not to be like his previous boss. After he ended his call with Jack, he immediately got out of his office and headed straight for the secretary. The secretary was a young man who seemed to be in his early 20s. He was diligent in his work and he had been recommended to him by Denali. Since she trusted him as she had been able to give him this opportunity, as well as the fact that she was good at identifying people with capabilities, he had decided to trust this secretary that had been recommended. That was the reason as to why he had hired him although he was young. The young man's name was Patrick. He hadn't entered the society for a long time now. In fact, it wasn't long since he graduated. Patrick, begin making preparations that are necessary for production. The boss is going to bring several scripts that will need to be produced as soon as possible. So, contact all those that can be found and inform them to be ready in case they are needed, Alex stated. Patrick was quite surprised to see that his boss actually came over to pass that piece of information. If it were any other time, just a phone call was enough to let him know about this. All the same, he didn't dare to delay and decided to contact all those that could be contacted through the email. It wasn't just those who were supposed to be the stars, but even the staff members. As long as they were not busy currently, they were contacted that they might be needed soon. When he saw that Patrick was making the communication, Alex nodded before he got back into his office. He too needed to make some preparations because Jack was going to come over the following day. The following day, Jack began writing the script. Since he didn't want to go there empty-handed, he decided that he was going to prepare one script before he arrived there. The script that he had basically prepared to write this time was simply about a planet that was being invaded was fighting against some alien creatures. It had always been prosperous, kingdoms and empires appearing in every part of the world. Of course, since many people wanted power, there were fights that happened now and then. The soldiers of each kingdom or empire were strong beyond the measure of the normal human capabilities. And as the result, each and every empire and kingdom was proud. Even each of their soldiers were arrogant. After all, they could be said to be at the top of the food chain. Enmity had already been developed between the different powers. But before they could even deal with the internal problems that they were having, something happened. During that time, they had spotted alien creatures. These alien creatures were invading the world. But even so, none of them took them seriously. These empires and kingdoms were all arrogant, thinking that they could easily deal with the alien creatures. And since that was the case, they decided that they were not going to join forces to deal with them. In fact, they decided that the one who was going to deal with them was the one who was going to get the resource that they were fighting for. So, it was decided that the kingdom or empire that was going to be attacked first was the one that was going to deal with the alien creatures. In the end, the first empire that encountered the alien creatures was the strongest empire in the world. And as a result, all the other kingdoms and empires in the world thought that this would be the end of the descent of the alien creatures. They couldn't help but feel sad at the loss of the resource that they were fighting for. But the results that came after that were greatly surprising. Not only had the greatest empire in the world failed to deal with the alien creatures, but they had been exterminated. The most horrifying thing was definitely the fact that they had been dealt with in only a single day. By the end of that day, not a single soul could be found in that empire. This definitely included all the human beings, as well as animals, either wild or domestic. It didn't matter what type of creature it was, but all of them were wiped out. This was a shocking news to the other kingdoms. And as a result, knowing that the situation wasn't something that they could joke around with, they decided that they were finally going to join forces to deal with the alien creatures. But in the end, they were too late in taking action. The moment that they were trying to come together so that they could deal with the alien creatures by creating one army that consisted of their strongest soldiers, the alien creatures attacked. The most surprising thing was that they didn't attack a single kingdom. They attacked all of them at once. And the soldiers, or the so-called warriors of the alien race, were not only strong, but they were having a numerical advantage as well. In other words, even though they were fighting all the kingdoms in the world, they still had a numerical advantage of 120. This had made all the forces in the world to fall into despair. At this moment, they were definitely regretting their arrogance. Their lofty attitudes had already disappeared. In their place, there was only despair. Of course, they were not going to sit down and wait for them to be eliminated. Since they were going to die anyway, they had decided to go all out. In their minds, it was that they were going to die with the alien race. Even if they were not going to eliminate the alien race, then they would simply make sure that they suffered heavy losses. With that, they used suicide means to try and reduce the numbers of the alien creatures. But, who would have thought that the moment that they started to do so, another powerful force would descend on the world? To the despair of the human race, the ones that had arrived were also part of the alien creatures. These were the generals of the alien creatures that had attacked. It turned out that the alien creatures that had been troubling them all along were just foot soldiers, nothing worth more than cannon fodders in the battlefield. As for the generals, although they were considered generals by the soldiers that had arrived, they were actually the normal elite soldiers of the alien creatures. And there were actually millions of them in the world where they originated from, and this time, they had sent only 20 of them. In other words, the world had been invaded by 20 elite soldiers and the cannon fodder of the alien race. In the end, even though they had decided to resort to suicide attacks so that they could deal with the alien creatures, they only turned out to be the weakest amongst the whole race. So, what could they do even if they dealt with some of the weakest soldiers of the alien race? That would be like doing nothing at all. Since they had already lost their fighting spirit, even if the kings and emperors of their particular kingdoms tried to motivate them and rise the fighting spirit amongst the soldiers, none of them responded positively. I think you should take a look at. Eventually, all the troops as well as the civilians that they were fighting hard to protect were wiped out completely. The alien race began celebrating as they had already conquered the planet. But just then, they were surprised to find out that the end result of their conquest was not acknowledged. Their mission this time was to wipe out every life form on this particular planet. This was the order that they had received from their superiors. They were promised to be rewarded immediately after they completed the mission. But even after a week had gone by and they thought that they had completed the mission, they didn't see any of their superiors making any moves. This was strange to them. As a result, one of them couldn't hold it back anymore and decided to contact back the headquarters that was on their planet to question about what was going on. But the news that they ended up receiving was that they had not completely erased all the life forms that were present on that particular planet. This piece of news had completely stunned them. How could it be possible that they had not erased all the lifeforms that were present on that planet? They had tried searching for any kind of life form on the planet, but they never found any. This was strange. But no matter how they told their superiors that they had completed the mission, their superiors said that they could detect several lifeforms present on that planet. And it wasn't just a single or maybe 10 life forms, but it was a huge number of life forms that counted up to millions. The 20 elite soldiers that had been sent over couldn't believe that there were several lifeforms that had hidden from them. And to make matters worse, it wasn't just 1 or 100, but millions. With great determination, they searched the whole planet, turning mountains and caves upside down, trying to look for anywhere that these lifeforms were hiding. They didn't believe that such a large number of life forms could hide from them easily. Considering that millions of alien creatures were searching for them, they believed that they were going to find them soon. However, no matter how long they searched, they never found the life forms that they were looking for. This had greatly frustrated the 20 elite soldiers. The mission that had been handed over to them, the one that they had thought that was just a simple piece of cake, was surprisingly getting difficult without them expecting it. Additionally, considering that the number of lifeforms that was remaining could only make up around 1.3% of the lifeforms in the whole planet, they were of course angry at the fact that only that small number of lifeforms was troubling them. How could they allow only such a small number of lifeforms to make them fail their mission? They knew that as long as their superiors made their moves, the mission that they had been given could be said to have been failed. Even though they didn't know the purpose of their superiors wanting the lifeforms of the planet cleared out, they knew that they were not supposed to question it. What's more, their race wasn't one that conquered other planets easily. They could actually be considered a peaceful race. But this time, they had actually set out to conquer a planet. And not only that, but to erase all the lifeforms that were present on that particular planet. This could be said to be a drastic shift in their normal character. But since they had resorted to doing something like that, the superiors of their race must be having something important that involved this particular planet. They searched for a whole month but they didn't find any trace of human activities, not to mention any other kind of life form. Even if it was an animal, since it didn't have the kind of intelligence like that of human beings to be able to know that they were in danger and they had to hide, they would have shown themselves by now. Since when they were dealing with the other human empires, they had plundered all the resources that they could find, they didn't believe that those that were hiding really had any kind of resources that they could utilize for a long time. As a result, they decided that they were going to keep an eye on the whole planet for the following months. They didn't believe that the life forms that were hiding would continue hiding without getting food. And so, they continued waiting while they continued searching at the same time. But the results continued disappointing them as 2 months went past but there were no traces of any kind of lifeforms on that planet. They couldn't help but be skeptical about their superiors. Could it be that they were simply messing with them? But how was that possible? In the eyes of their superiors, they were nothing at all. Even the 20 elite soldiers that had descended on this planet could be said that they were the weakest amongst the elite soldiers. So, how could it be that their superiors really had time to entertain them? It seemed that time was not on their side. The superiors who had been waiting patiently for a long time finally decided to make a move. Without caring about the dissatisfaction among the 20 elite soldiers of the alien race, they decided that they were going to use their abilities to finally detect where the lifeforms were hidden in that planet. But what surprised them was the fact that, even after the superiors descended, they didn't actually detect the exact location where the hidden lifeforms were currently at. Although they had the ability to detect that there were several lifeforms present on that planet, they couldn't detect where they were located. This had caused a commotion amongst the higher-ups of the alien race. They were getting anxious as time went on. And in the end, even the very top echelons of the alien race was forced to make a move. After about 2 weeks of searching, they didn't find the location where the life forms were hidden. In the end, due to the anger that was boiling in their hearts, they decided that they were going to destroy the planet. The planet was no longer going to be useful to them since it had the lifeforms in it. For the purpose that they themselves knew, they couldn't allow any kind of life form to be present on that particular planet before they took it over. Without waiting, each and every one of them decided to attack at their full strength. Of course, they targeted the core of the planet. As long as they destroyed it, they were sure that they were going to be able to destroy the whole planet. But just after the first attack landed, something unimaginable happened. A ripple appeared and the attack that was supposed to land on the ground suddenly disappeared. It was as if a small pebble had been dropped on the surface of the ocean. Other than the small ripples that were caused on the surface, there was nothing that occurred. The alien race higher-ups wouldn't believe it, and as a result, they decided to attack again, but in the end, the same result appeared. But, at that moment, they were completely confused. After all, when the 20 elite soldiers and the millions of the normal soldiers attacked the land previously, they had definitely destroyed the landscape. But no matter how hard or how fast they attacked, they couldn't get anything out of it. After several days of research, they finally realized that there was a certain level of power that when used, the result of the ripple appearing on the surface of the world would definitely appear. This was the first time that they had encountered something like that. They were not sure about what they were going to do next. In the end, they came to a decision that, since it was not necessary for them to destroy this planet, they could as well use their energy to conquer another planet that might be useful to them. As such, the higher-ups of the alien race decided to leave that particular planet. As for those who had been in charge of attacking this planet, they were given the task of trying to look for the life forms if they could find any clue about them. Since the planet was currently unoccupied, they, who were going to stay here, were the ones who were going to get the resources that were going to appear on this planet back to their home planet. After the higher-ups left, they immediately decided to take action rather than sending a troop to attack another planet. And as a result, they easily conquered another planet that was just the same size as the one that they had failed to conquer completely. And after that, they finally heaved a sigh of relief. As for the reason for why they had done that, only they themselves knew. Back on the planet that they had attacked first, these 20 elite soldiers didn't want to give up on the mission that had been given to them. Perhaps if they succeeded on getting the life forms that were present on that planet before destroying them, they might as well be rewarded for that. As such, they continued searching and searching for any kind of life form on that planet day in day out. It didn't matter how many times they had searched a particular place or point, they continued searching that point the following day. And, since there were billions of them, they easily covered the whole planet. But, they always shifted their positions in such a way that, if one searched a certain area, he or she wouldn't be searching that position any longer until he or she had covered the whole planet. I think you should take a look at. 2 months went by and, the higher-ups had finally completed what they were planning. But, the end result wasn't what they had expected. For that reason, they decided to conquer yet another planet. And although they had not succeeded in what they had intended to do previously, it had still bought them a few months' time for them to complete what they wanted. Back to the planet that was their first target, the 20 elite soldiers were getting frustrated as time went by. Since they were currently on that planet, they couldn't get the benefits that they could have gotten when they were back on their home planet. This had made them think about trying to go back. They had previously thought that they might succeed in getting the lifeforms that were hidden on that planet. But the end result was that, even after months of searching, they couldn't get anything. "How much I hate this," one of the 20 elite soldiers shouted as he kicked a rock that was on the ground. Boom! The moment that he did that, the ground shook. It was as if a high-magnitude earthquake had suddenly occurred. But to the warriors present, something like this wasn't threatening to them at all. But what occurred next perplexed them. A ripple, just like the one that had appeared when the higher-ups were attacking the planet, suddenly appeared. Immediately after that, something akin to a shield or barrier appeared. It was hemispherical in shape, and inside this particular barrier, there was something that shocked these alien race warriors. Inside that barrier, there were actually several lifeforms. It wasn't just human beings, but even different kinds of animals and plants were present. It was as if another world had suddenly sprouted out of the ground. And, the human beings and the creatures that were present in that barrier that had appeared, were also shocked about the sudden change in the environment out of the place where they were. Outside the barrier that they had always known about, there was a desolate land. It was as if there was no life at all. Not to mention animals or human beings, there wasn't even a small plant. What had appeared was well known as the mini-kingdom. This was something that, if the alien race had taken their time to read through the historical books that were present in the empires and kingdoms that they had destroyed, they would have found the information about this mini-kingdom. Mini-kingdom, this was the name that had been given to this piece of land that was contained inside a barrier. Although it was said to be a mini-kingdom, if a person looked at it now, they would find out that it wasn't any small as compared to the biggest empire in this world before it had been destroyed. The word mini-kingdom had been granted to it during the time that it had disappeared from the world. Before it was sealed away, it was the most prosperous kingdom in the world. But due to human greed, the other kingdoms decided to attack it so that they could plunder the resources that were present in that kingdom. Back then, they didn't care about the life of those who were present in that kingdom. Whoever appeared in front of their soldiers was killed without mercy. The population of the kingdom began plummeting at a higher speed. What followed was rivers of blood flowing from village to village. The king of the kingdom at that time was infuriated by the actions of the other kings and emperors. But, knowing that he couldn't fight against the whole world, he had decided to take the drastic action that could save his people. By sacrificing his own life, he used a relic that had been left by his ancestors to seal away the kingdom. And as such, the kingdom suddenly got enveloped by a barrier before it completely vanished as if it never existed before. As for those soldiers who were attacking them at that time, they had been expelled from that kingdom by a strange and mysterious force. It had remained like that. The kingdom had been sealed away for about 5 centuries. Generations after generations appeared as they went by. The population recovered to what it was before they were attacked, and even surpassed it. The crown prince at that time took over the position as the king and continued strengthening the kingdom. Since their kingdom was the most resourceful one, they could be independent. So, without needing any assistance from the other kingdoms, they had managed to survive till this day. As for the reason as to why they had suddenly appeared, it definitely wasn't due to that soldier kicking a rock. It was simply because the time had finally come for them to come out of their ceiling. But none of them had ever expected that. What greeted them wasn't the big and flourishing world that they had always been told about, but a desolate place filled with creatures that they had never seen before. When they appeared, the current king, who was of the 6th generation, ever since they had sealed themselves in that space using the relic, was dumbfounded. From the information that he had received from his father and grandfather was that, after 5 centuries, they would finally appear back to the normal world. They had all been informed about how the normal world looked like. There wasn't the barrier that surrounded the other world just like the one that they were in. Additionally, it was big and beautiful. Since their population was already high, they had been forced to cut down several trees in order to create plantations for the sources of food. So, when they appeared, they were expecting that they were going to see the beautiful forests and so on. But now, even though the land was desolate, it would have been better if they would have seen their fellow human beings. But, the figures that they were seeing after they had exited the ceiling space were not something that they had ever seen before. And to make matters worse, it seemed that these creatures were looking at them as if they were a piece of lost gem. Could it be that the humans who were supposed to be on this planet have undergone evolution or something? The humans who had just appeared couldn't help but wonder. None of them dared to step out of the barrier. They had to make sure that everything was okay with the strangers that they were seeing before they stepped out. If their fellow humans could attack them, they definitely couldn't trust these aliens. As such, the current king of the mini-kingdom took a step forward and headed towards the barrier. He looked at the alien warriors before he asked about what happened out there. But in the end, the alien warriors spoke in a language that he couldn't understand at all. And before the current king could make out on how to communicate with them, these alien warriors actually rushed towards the barrier. They had already drawn out their weapons ready to attack. The excitement in their eyes couldn't be hidden away as they charged towards the barrier. This had not only startled the current king, but all the other humans who were already anticipating on going out of the barrier. Since they had never been in a war for any period of their lifetime, they were not used to seeing such ferocious faces. Other than a few people who were part of the kingdom higher-ups, the rest were frightened. They weren't sure if the barrier could hold out the thousands of alien warriors that were charging at them. But just then, they were informed that there were other alien warriors that were charging towards the barrier from all directions. In other words, this mini-kingdom was surrounded. The current king couldn't help but be exasperated, but since he was the current head of the kingdom, he had to maintain his composure in front of his subjects. According to the information that he had received from his father and grandfather, he knew that the barrier was strong enough to block attacks from those who were going to attack them for at least 1 year. But immediately after 1 year, the barrier would dissipate. At that time, they would be on their own. Although the barrier could definitely block others from coming in, all those who were members of this kingdom couldn't be blocked from going out and coming back in. But he was currently skeptical if it was true that the barrier could hold out these warriors that were charging at them. At the end of the day, the information that they had received, that the world that was outside, although it was dangerous, it was also beautiful, was definitely false. There was nothing beautiful out there other than the danger. Taking a deep breath, the current king prepared himself to take action. Although they had been isolated from the world for a very long period of time, that didn't mean that they were weak. They had always been training, in preparation for the time that they would be coming back to the real world. It was just that, they lacked the horning of the battlefield. This was the reason as to why they were not courageous enough in the face of the attacking army. Even so, the king was getting ready to engage in the fight as long as the warriors that were attacking them breached the barrier. The first warrior arrived at the barrier before striking. Although the warrior wasn't sure if the barrier was solid or not, it wouldn't hurt if he missed because the barrier was not solid. That warrior was carrying an axe as his weapon. The moment that it came into contact with the barrier, it was as if he had hit a cushion that was made of cotton. The attack didn't cause any kind of damage on the barrier, but the warrior who was attacking was suddenly flung away. As he flew away, he screamed in agony as several bones in his body were suddenly broken. Just like that, a warrior that had been giving the previous empires and kingdoms a hard time to defeat was suddenly defeated. I think you should take a look at. Both sides were left stunned. It was true that none of them had expected the result. And of course, it wasn't just that single warrior who had attacked at that moment. There were several hundreds of thousands that had attacked at that moment all around the barrier. The end result was the same, they were left on the ground wailing as bones in their body were completely broken. In other words, they were no longer fit to fight in the battlefield. Of course, as these warriors that were attacking were being sent away flying, they had definitely swept away a good number of their fellow warriors. For a moment, both sides didn't make a move as they looked at the barrier. None of them could explain what just happened. After about 10 minutes, the people who were present inside the barrier couldn't help but celebrate. At the end of the day, they were the ones who were being attacked. As such, they saw the barrier as their life-saving grace. The 20 elite warriors of the alien race finally arrived at the scene after using their battleships. These battleships were at a high level. They could easily go around this planet in just a matter of minutes. Since the elite warriors were not that far from the area that the barrier had suddenly appeared, they had arrived in just about 20 minutes since the mini-kingdom appeared. One of them immediately attacked the barrier. In his mind, he believed that, if the weaklings couldn't handle it, that didn't mean that he too couldn't do anything to the barrier. Using his spear, he attacked fiercely, but the result that appeared next startled his companions. Just like the other normal warriors, he was sent flying while screaming in pain. The moment that he landed on the ground, he didn't make any more moves or sound. In other words, the result of his attack was definitely worse as compared to the attacks that the normal warriors had received. This elite warrior had died just like that. This had definitely made all the alien warriors around not to dare making any move on that barrier. The current king on the other hand heaved a sigh of relief after seeing that at least, the information about the barrier wasn't false. Otherwise, they would have to face this strong warriors immediately after they came out of the ceiling. They themselves hadn't prepared themselves for a war like this. They had been living peacefully for centuries. How could they handle the creatures that had attacked them? The current king called the council to discuss on what steps they were going to take next. As for those subjects of his, he had made sure to instruct all of them not to dare to take any step outside the barrier. Since they had all seen what had happened to all those that had attacked the barrier, these people were all frightened to dare approach it lest they were killed. Outside the barrier, the elite warriors didn't know what step to take. In the end, they decided to inform their superiors about the appearance of the lifeforms that they had been looking all around for. Immediately after that, the higher-ups who had suddenly received the information came to the planet hurriedly. It seemed that even after gaining a few months' time, they couldn't do what they had originally planned. Since this planet was the most compatible with the plan that they were intending to carry out, they wouldn't lose a chance if there was one to acquire it. When they looked at the barrier, they couldn't help but frown. They could detect the same energy that had been preventing their attacks from reaching the core of the planet. In other words, it was the same thing that had created this barrier, that was preventing them from destroying this planet before. Even though they were not sure that they could destroy the barrier, one of them stepped forward and attacked. But, the result was just like the elite warrior that had attacked before. This person was also killed. Unlike the others, he was blasted into a bloody mist. Just like that, he was also dead. And, he didn't even leave a body behind. The others were frightened when they saw this. They couldn't react for a moment. After some contemplation, the higher-ups decided to start studying the barrier. They were getting anxious as time went by. After about 2 weeks of their research, they came to a conclusion that, if they continued attacking the barrier, it would dissipate in just 3 months. But, attacking the barrier would definitely require sacrifices to be made, and after a long period of contemplation, they decided to sacrifice their cannon fodder. To them, they could always nurture another billion warriors like them. And just like brainwashed maniacs, these warriors actually charged at the barrier fearlessly. Although they knew that they might die when they attacked it, none of them hesitated as long as they were ordered by their superiors. One after another, the alien race warriors sacrificed themselves to attack the barrier. None of them dared to hesitate making a move, although they knew the end result. This situation had definitely alarmed the higher-ups of the mini-kingdom. They had never expected that these creatures would definitely try launching several attacks, although they knew that they wouldn't succeed in destroying the barrier. The current king was also flabbergasted. He had never expected that these alien creatures would be cruel to themselves like that. After all, in a matter of minutes, there were already several mountains of bodies that were scattered outside the barrier. Upon noticing that these bodies were causing them inconvenience, the higher-ups of the alien race made a decision. With a single wave of their sleeves, they managed to emit a strange energy that decomposed the bodies of all those that were on the ground. Although it was true that none of them had already died at that time, but they had already lost their combat abilities. And as such, they were practically useless for the mission that they were supposed to carry out. Even though they saw that their comrades were being treated in such a manner, these warriors who were charging forward didn't hesitate at all. They continued charging forward as if they had not seen anything happening. In fact, they thought that this was a privilege that they could die by the hands of their superiors, and as such, they charged towards the barrier with even more vigor. The current king was worried at that moment. Unlike his subjects who thought that the barrier would always prevent these creatures from getting in, he knew that these alien race warriors were continuously consuming the energy that was supporting the barrier. He was getting anxious on what he was supposed to do next. If possible, he really would have sacrificed his life, just like his ancestor did, to seal the kingdom away again. But there was a limitation on the relic that was used. It couldn't be used twice, unless there was a cool-down period of 5 decades. Knowing that the barrier was going to be broken sooner than he had expected, the current king began making preparations on what they were going to do next. He ordered all the soldiers to get ready for war. Although he himself wasn't sure at what period the barrier was going to break, he had to make enough preparations as early as possible. Although the soldiers were confused about why the king had ordered them to prepare for a fight, they still obeyed. Though, none of them was that much serious about the alien creatures that were charging at them. At the end of it all, they were all being blocked by the barrier. Just like that, 3 months went by. And during the first day of the 4th month, ever since the alien creatures had been attacking the barrier relentlessly, a crack appeared on the barrier. This was something that had been noticed by both sides of the barrier. While one side was celebrating, the other side was definitely panicking. Even though the residents of the mini-kingdom were praying so hard so that the barrier wouldn't break, the alien warriors on the other hand attacked even more ferociously. Since it was a situation where a single warrior only needed to attack once, each and every warrior who was attacking the barrier was at his full strength. The higher-ups had already brought all those who had been scattered around the world. Billions of them had already perished, but there were several reinforcements that were coming to the planet from their home planet. The superiors of the alien race who were already getting impatient had their eyes glinting with excitement. After a long period of waiting, they had finally managed to start breaching the barrier. Without even caring anymore, since they wanted to speed up the process of the barrier being broken, they began sending their elite warriors. Not only would these warriors be able to deal a great deal of damage on the barrier, but they would also ensure that the barrier broke faster. Although this was going to be a loss for them, there were still other millions of elite warriors that were present back at their home planet. And as long as they succeeded in their plans, they would be able to nurture even more elite warriors. Surprisingly, just like the normal warriors of the alien race, as long as these elite warriors were ordered to attack the barrier, although they knew that they were going to perish, they too joined the fray. In just a matter of minutes, the barrier was fully enveloped by cracks, and then, with a loud bang, the barrier broke into several fragments that scattered in the air before vanishing. This time, the superiors of the alien race didn't wait for the elite warriors to charge forward and destroy the lifeforms that were present on the planet. Instead, they had decided to take action by themselves. They had already been getting impatient after waiting for several months now. Since they themselves could easily destroy these humans as well as other lifeforms present faster, they were going to do it themselves. The first superior of the alien race stepped forward. He wasn't the topmost superior, but he was definitely far stronger than any elite warrior. When he got close to the kingdom, he attacked by throwing his spear. The power behind that spear was tremendous, in that it gave an illusion that it could destroy the world. I think you should take a look at. The ones at the receiving end of the attack were startled. They had never expected to be attacked by those who were supposedly the strongest of the alien race. Even so, one of the generals of the kingdom took a step forward. Although he was currently feeling uneasy about the attack that was heading his way, he still collected his courage and decided to face the attack. In his heart, he was currently thinking about all those people that he was supposed to protect. He wasn't going to let his wife and children to perish under the hands of the alien race. With great determination in his heart, he unleashed an attack with his great sword. The air was sliced by the sword momentum. Clang! Crack! The two weapons collided in the air, causing a massive shockwave to erupt. And in the next moment, something unimaginable happened. The spear that had been charging ferociously towards the kingdom suddenly cracked. In the next moment, it crumbled as if it was a piece of dry clay that had been smashed on a stone. But that was not all. The airwave that had been created by the swinging of the great sword didn't stop at all. It charged towards the large group of alien warriors that were still charging towards the kingdom despite knowing that an attack was going to land on it. As if they were made of sand, anyone who was within the range of the airwave was immediately crushed into pieces. A huge space was immediately created amongst the charging wave of the alien warriors. After that attack, both sides remained silent. None of them could actually believe such a result. Who would have thought that the people who were hiding behind that barrier were very strong? As for the generals as well as those who were behind him, they looked at the general in both surprise and excitement. Although they had never thought that the general was this strong, they were still happy that he was able to easily handle the alien creatures. The ones who were the most excited were definitely those who were stronger than that particular general. In their minds, they were thinking that, if their fellow was that strong, then how strong were they? But just as they were about to charge forward so that they could test their strengths, the current king spoke. It is not that you guys are stronger, it is just that they are weaker than us. Charge forward. Destroy them who are aiming to destroy our homeland. The momentum within the army was immediately raised to the highest level. Although such a statement would have definitely made some of the soldiers to underestimate their opponents, that would have only applied to other soldiers. These soldiers had never been in a battlefield before, and as a result, what they lacked the most was courage. Knowing that their opponents were way weaker than them, they all charged forward with the aim to destroy. Once a bullied person got a person who was way weaker than him, he will definitely do everything he could to vent out. During the past 3 months, all of them had been afraid that the barrier would be broken and they would have to face some of the strongest opponents they ever had in their lives. But now that they had known that their opponents were weak, they were planning to vent out their anger on them. Although they were at a disadvantage numerically, when it came to personal strength, it didn't matter how many enemies they faced at once. Each and every soldier attacked and killed an opponent with each swing of their weapon. The superiors of the alien race had never expected something like this. No matter how they thought about it, they couldn't understand how these people were way stronger than those that have been living outside the barrier. What they didn't know was that, inside the barrier, those who were living inside were having a hard time as compared to those outside due to the harsh conditions inside there. Of course, the changes had never happened only once. Instead, during the course of the first 2 centuries, there had been adaptation of all the humans and other lifeforms that were present inside the barrier. For that reason, these soldiers had all developed a very strong physique. So, they were way stronger than any of the soldiers that were present in the previous kingdoms and empires. Even though the superiors of the alien race interfered, none of them managed to change anything. They were utterly defeated. In the end, they were forced to abandon the plan that they had been waiting to carry out. They were forced to flee in order to save themselves. But, although they had managed to escape, the losses that they had suffered were uncountable. It wasn't just the elite warriors, but even some of the superiors had been killed off. What's more, the humans who were present in the barrier were not willing to give up. They had decided to attack the home planet of the alien race after they had made enough preparations.